to do a book and to tell my story. And I think it was time to do it.
The world remembers Elvis Presley as the king, but Priscilla remembers something else his last night. It was a night painted with shadows, whispers, and moments the world was never meant to know. While fans saw the star, she saw the man behind the crown struggling with the weight of his battles. What she has now revealed is not a story of fame or glory, but one of silence and sorrow. Her untold truth about that final night will shatter the image of a legend, leaving behind only a broken heart and haunting memory. The night a young girl met the king. It was September of the year 1959 when the world of a quiet 14-year-old girl shifted forever. Her name was Priscilla Presley, and she had no way of knowing that one evening in West Germany would place her life in the path of one of the most famous men on earth, Elvis Presley. Priscilla's story had not been an easy one. Her real father, Navy pilot Lieutenant James Wagner, had passed away in a plane crash when she was only 6 months old. She never knew him except through faded photographs and the gentle way her mother, Anne, spoke of him. Life carried her forward, and her mother later remarried to U.S. Air Force officer Captain Paul Beaulieu. Together they raised a bustling household, Priscilla and her 5 younger half-siblings. As a military family, the Beaulieu moved from place to place, never staying long enough to plant deep roots. That year, their latest stop had brought them to Wiesbaden, Germany. Far from home, Priscilla lived the life of a typical teenager, quiet and curious, still half-child but slowly drifting toward womanhood. She could not have imagined that her small steps into adolescence would suddenly lead her into the orbit of a man who belonged to the entire world. Elvis Presley had already lived through more in 24 years than most could dream of in a lifetime. In March of 1958, when he was drafted into the U.S. Army, the world gasped. The hound dog singer who had electrified stages, rattled televisions, and made young girls scream at the tilt of his hips was suddenly wearing a soldier's uniform. Fans wondered if this would dim the bright flame of his career. Only a year and a half earlier, his appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show had sent him soaring into superstardom. And in that short time, he had already sold millions of records and purchased Graceland, an 18-room mansion in Memphis that became his kingdom. Behind the glamour and excess, though, Elvis was a man of contradictions. He loved lavish clothes and grand decor, yet he remained deeply tied to the simple teachings of his Southern upbringing. He adored his mother, Gladys Presley, more than anything in the world, and her sudden death in August of 1958 struck a wound in him that never truly healed. Friends said he was never the same afterward. It was in this fragile state, lonely, searching, restless, that Elvis found himself stationed in Germany, living in a rented house in the town of Bad Nauheim. And it was here, in that unlikely setting, that fate decided to weave his story with that of young Priscilla. The night they met, Priscilla wore a simple sailor dress. She had chosen it carefully, though she still could hardly believe the whispers that she was about to meet Elvis Presley himself. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the room filled with music, chatter, and smoke. Then she saw him, tall, magnetic, with the unmistakable air of someone who could command the attention of every soul around him. Elvis's eyes caught hers, and a playful smile tugged at his lips. "Well, what have we here? What are you, about a junior or senior in high school?" he asked, his southern drawl both teasing and warm. Shy, she told him she was only in 9th grade. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Why, you're just a baby." The words embarrassed her, yet there was no cruelty in his voice. Then, as though to ease her nerves, he strolled to the piano, sat down and began to play. His fingers moved across the keys, and his voice filled the room, low and soulful. Priscilla noticed something extraordinary. Elvis was singing not for the crowd, but for her. The less she reacted, the more he leaned into the notes, as though desperate for her attention. She sat frozen, her mind spinning with disbelief. Elvis Presley, the man the world adored, was trying to impress her. That first meeting became the beginning of something she could never have imagined. She was invited back to his house again and again. Each visit brought her deeper into a world both thrilling and intimidating. On the third evening, Elvis asked her upstairs, Her heart raced, but he quickly assured her, "I swear I'll never do anything to harm you. I'll treat you just like a sister." His words, calm and protective, melted her fears. She believed him. Back at home, however, her parents were far from reassured. A superstar 10 years older than their daughter drawing her into his life, it alarmed them. They insisted she stay away. But Priscilla, swept by emotions she could hardly name, did not listen. Her stepfather, Captain Paul Beaulieu, finally put his foot down. If this was going to continue, then Elvis himself would have to face them. The evening Elvis came to dinner, he arrived in full uniform, polished and dignified, as if to prove his respect. The family waited tensely as Captain Beaulieu asked the question on everyone's mind. "What do you want?" Elvis looked the man directly in the eye. His voice was steady. "Well, sir, I happen to be very fond of her. She's a lot more mature than her age, and I enjoy her company. It hasn't been easy for me, being away from home and all. It gets kinda lonely. I guess you might say I need someone to talk to. You do not have to worry about her, Captain. I'll take good care of her." The sincerity in his tone softened the family's doubts, though unease still lingered. Despite the rules of propriety in the eyes of the world, Priscilla and Elvis grew deeply involved. They shared stolen moments and whispered dreams, building a bond that felt both forbidden and unshakable. Elvis's Southern upbringing had instilled in him a firm belief: the right girl was to be saved for marriage. To him, Priscilla was that girl. He molded her, guiding how she dressed, how she wore her hair, even the makeup she put on her face. She became, in many ways, the reflection of the woman he wanted by his side. And yet, beneath the glamour of being chosen by Elvis Presley, Priscilla often felt the sting of loneliness. For while she was by his side, she had to share him with the world, with screaming fans, endless admirers, and a public that demanded pieces of him day and night. The hours when she felt truly happy were not at parties or public gatherings, but in the quiet of his bedroom, late in the night. There, away from the flashing cameras and eager crowds, they would sit together, talk for hours, and share long kisses. In those moments, she felt as though he belonged only to her. She would later insist that their relationship remained innocent until their wedding night, but the intimacy they shared bound them deeply nonetheless. Still, life outside those walls pressed hard against Priscilla. School became harder to manage, her grades slipping as she spent more time with Elvis. One evening, noticing her exhaustion, Elvis handed her a small handful of pills. "These will help you stay awake tomorrow," he told her casually. She slipped them into her hand but never swallowed them. Only later did she learn what they truly were: dexedrine, amphetamines that Elvis himself had begun using during his time in the Army. The realization shook her. She was still only a girl, teetering between innocence and the overwhelming force of a man whose life was already etched in legend. The silent battle behind the spotlight. For decades, whenever the name Priscilla Presley is spoken, it often comes hand in hand with the memory of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. To the world, she has long been seen as the beautiful young woman who stood beside the most famous entertainer of his time, dressed in glamour, admired by millions, and surrounded by the shine of fame. But when the bright lights faded and the crowds disappeared, Priscilla Ann Presley, born on May 24, 1945, faced struggles and heartbreaks that were hers alone to carry. Her life is not simply the story of a woman connected to a legend. It is also the story of a young girl who grew up in a restless childhood, who walked into extraordinary circumstances too early, and who lived through both incredible success and devastating loss. Her journey, with all its hidden battles, has a tragic beauty that speaks not just of fame, but of resilience, quiet strength, and a spirit that refuses to give in. Now, as Priscilla prepares to open her heart through her upcoming memoir, Softly As I Leave You, she promises to take the world into the hidden corners of her life, the years after Elvis, the moments of private sorrow, and the fragile victories of her strength. For many, this will be the first time they will see her not just as the woman beside the king, but as someone who carved her path through grief, doubt, and survival. In September of 1959, while Elvis Presley was stationed in West Germany, a 14-year-old Priscilla met him at a party. She was a quiet girl, still carrying the softness of youth, while he was already the king of rock and roll at 24. For her, it was a moment that altered everything. That night began a connection that would carry her into a world unlike anything she could have imagined. A girl who had known an unstable childhood suddenly found herself standing in the center of one of the brightest spotlights in the world. It was dazzling, it was overwhelming, and it was also the start of a story that the world would watch with fascination. Being with Elvis meant more than being part of his music or his fame. It meant being drawn into a life where every move was followed, every smile photographed, and every silence filled with speculation. To the world, she was the glamorous partner of the king, but to herself, she was still learning, still searching, still trying to define who she was. The love she shared with Elvis was real, but so were the struggles that came with it. Behind the closed doors of their lives were moments of doubt, confusion, and the quiet ache of trying to balance personal dreams with the weight of someone else's legend. She was a wife, a mother, a partner, yet at the same time she was also a woman who wanted to find her voice. Even though the world saw her as living in luxury, her life was filled with battles that were hidden from the public gaze. Fame does not shield anyone from heartbreak. Priscilla faced the strain of constant attention, the pain of separations, and the loneliness that comes when the world thinks it knows your story, but in truth, only sees the surface. The world adored Elvis, and through him, they adored her. But that same connection meant her identity was always tied to his. For years, she was seen not as herself, but as the woman beside him. It was a shadow she lived in, one that both lifted her and weighed her down. When Elvis's life ended in 1977, Priscilla's world was shaken. The man who had been her first great love, the father of her child, and the figure who had drawn her into a world of unimaginable fame was gone. The grief was not only personal but public. She had to mourn under the eyes of millions. Yet even in this devastation, she showed resilience. She stepped forward, raising their daughter, Lisa Marie, and carefully carrying the weight of the Presley name. She did not allow herself to be crushed by sorrow. Instead, she began the long, quiet work of shaping her life beyond the legend. Through years of effort, Priscilla became more than just Elvis's former wife. She built herself as an actress, a businesswoman, and the caretaker of Elvis's legacy. It was not easy to stand alone when the world always tied her to someone else, but she pushed forward, proving that she was more than her past. Her choices were sometimes questioned, her steps sometimes misunderstood, but she never gave up on defining who she was. The unstable childhood that had once forced her to adapt now gave her the strength to keep reinventing herself, even when the path was filled with challenges. Priscilla's life has been marked by love, loss, fame, and quiet endurance. From the young girl who moved from place to place, to the woman who stood beside the most famous man in the world, to the widow who had to raise her child and manage her grief in front of millions, every stage of her journey has demanded resilience. Her story is not just one of glamour and sorrow, it is also one of survival. She teaches us that even when the world only sees the surface, the private battles we fight shape who we truly are. She reminds us that grief does not have to destroy us, and that strength often grows in silence, away from applause and recognition. Now, as Priscilla prepares to share her memoir, the world waits to see the story told in her words. Softly, as I leave, you will open the door to the hidden places of her life, where the struggles were as real as the triumphs. It will reveal the woman behind the image, the mother behind the fame, and the survivor behind the legend. Her journey is not finished. Even today, she continues to wrestle with loss, to reflect on the past, and to walk forward into new chapters of life. Her story remains a lesson in endurance, a reminder that even those who seem to live lives of glamour face battles that the world does not see. Priscilla Presley's name will forever be linked to Elvis, and in many ways, that is a part of her legacy. But there is another legacy, one that belongs only to her, the legacy of her strength, her courage, and her quiet determination to survive. The woman who loved the king. The world has always known her as the woman who captured the heart of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. For decades, the story of Priscilla Presley has been told through the lens of her marriage, her love, and her life with him. Their love story began in 1959, a tale that enchanted millions and set imaginations alight. Yet behind the glittering lights and roaring crowds, behind the iconic stage performances and screaming fans, there was another story, quieter, deeper, and filled with struggles few ever saw. It was the story of a young woman who loved a man the world adored, but who also had to endure the storm that came with it. Priscilla's life with Elvis was both a dream and a burden. To the outside world, she seemed to have everything: wealth, fame, and the devotion of the most sought-after man alive. She was the wife of a global superstar, the face who stood beside him when the cameras flashed. But within the walls of Graceland, reality was far different. What seemed like a fairy tale from the outside often felt like a cage from the inside. Elvis was not just a husband, he was an empire. His life was ruled by constant attention, by fans who worshipped him, and an industry that demanded his every hour. For Priscilla, being married to him meant living in his shadow, yearning for his time and affection while he was constantly pulled in other directions. She wanted a family, a home filled with love and peace, but what she faced instead was long nights of waiting, endless tours, and the silent ache of wondering where she stood in his world. She would later reveal how hard it was to carry that weight. Elvis struggled with being faithful, caught between the temptations that came with fame and the longing to be a simple man at home. There were battles with addiction, moments of anger, and stretches of absence. Fame was not just a blessing, it was a curse that followed them everywhere. Priscilla often found herself torn between the role of wife, mother, and caretaker for a man who seemed to be carrying the world on his shoulders. When Elvis dreamed of a family, he dreamed with his heart. But when reality came, he struggled to balance it with the life he had chosen. His music, his films, his tours, all of it demanded him. Priscilla, who wanted stability, was left to hold together the fragile threads of their home. It was a battle between what they both wanted and what fame allowed them to have. In later years, during a deeply intimate conversation on Larry King Now, Priscilla pulled back the curtain on what life had been like. She spoke not as the glamorous wife the world remembered, but as a woman who had lived through the storm. She described a marriage full of love, yes, but also filled with painful trials. Elvis was the king to the world, but to her, he was a man of contradictions, tender one moment, lost the next, devoted in his heart, yet absent in his choices. The public adored the legend, but Priscilla lived with the man. That difference brought her more heartache than people could ever see. There were nights when the lights of Graceland sparkled, when fans gathered at the gates, when reporters wrote about their perfect life. And yet inside, she sat alone, wishing for the kind of love that could not be divided by fame. By the year 1973, the weight of it all became too much. Priscilla made the decision that shocked the world. She divorced Elvis Presley. It was a moment that made headlines everywhere. To leave the most famous man alive seemed unthinkable. But for her, it was not about headlines. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming her life, about finding the courage to step away from the shadow of a legend and stand in her light. The divorce was not an end to their connection. If anything, it marked the beginning of a different kind of bond. Elvis, despite everything, often came to see her. He would walk through her door, sit with her, and talk about his struggles, his worries, and his heartaches. She became his confidant, the person he trusted even after love had been tested and broken. Their bond, fragile yet unshakable, remained. It was not the same as before, but it was something rare. Proof that love could survive in another form, even after the vows had ended. For Priscilla, life after Elvis was not easy. She had to find herself again, to build a life where her name was not just tied to his. She stepped into new roles, searching for an identity of hers. She became an actress, taking on roles in Dallas and later in the Naked Gun series, showing the world that she was more than just the king's former wife. She entered the world of business, where she became the driving force behind Elvis Presley Enterprises, turning it into a thriving success that honored his memory while also giving her a new purpose. These years were about more than survival. They were about transformation. Priscilla had to prove, first to herself and then to the world, that she could stand alone. She was no longer just the young girl who had once stood beside Elvis in the spotlight. She was a woman with her dreams, her struggles, and her triumphs. She was carving out a future built not on someone else's fame, but on her strength. Her story is one of resilience. She showed that even when love breaks, it does not have to be destroyed. She showed that even when the world sees you as one half of a legend, you can still step forward and write your chapters. The most beautiful part of her journey was that she never erased Elvis from her life. She carried his memory, his music, and his presence not as a burden, but as a part of her story. She honored him in the way she raised their daughter, in the way she protected his legacy, and in the way she continued to speak of him with love, with honesty, and with the quiet dignity of someone who had lived it all. Priscilla Presley's life was never just about being the wife of a superstar. It was about being a woman who loved, who hurt, who endured, and who grew. It was about facing the storm of fame and still finding the strength to walk through it. Her journey, filled with both heartbreak and triumph, remains one of the most compelling stories behind the glittering curtain of Hollywood. Priscilla Presley's silent strength and unshakable grace. In the glittering light of fame, where flashbulbs chase every step and whispers follow like shadows, there lives a woman whose story is far heavier than the glimmer of her name. Priscilla Presley has walked through the brightest halls of adoration, and yet has also stumbled through valleys so dark that even the strongest souls might have broken under their weight. Her life, from its earliest days in the spotlight, has always been marked by contrast. To the world, she was the young beauty who stood beside Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. To the people who admired her from afar, she was elegance, grace, and a quiet mystery. But behind the polished image, she endured storms that few could imagine. Time and again, her strength was tested, her heart shattered, and her spirit called to rise again when it seemed there was nothing left to hold on to. One of the most painful chapters in her story came with the loss of her beloved daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. There is no wound deeper for a mother than losing a child, and for Priscilla the grief has been relentless, pressing on her soul every single day. Lisa Marie was not only her daughter but also her closest companion through the whirlwind of a life shaped by Elvis's legacy. Losing her left a silence that cannot be filled, a shadow that clings to every corner of memory. For Priscilla, the heartbreak was beyond words, yet she continued to walk, to breathe, to face the world, even with a heart so heavy it seemed impossible to carry. Her sorrow was magnified because this was not the first time she had met grief. Loss had always hovered close around her, reminding her of how fragile love and life could be. But in Lisa Marie's passing, the world saw the rawest pain of all, a mother mourning a child she thought she would always protect. People admired her for her composure, her calm presence, but only she knew the weight of tears shed behind closed doors. Yet in her grief, Priscilla revealed something extraordinary: resilience. She did not allow sorrow to silence her voice or erase her truth. Instead, she turned her pain into a quiet kind of courage, one that spoke not through loud proclamations but through endurance itself. Every appearance she made, every step she took forward reminded the world that even in heartbreak, there can be strength. But life's cruelty did not stop there. Alongside her personal grief, Priscilla faced challenges that exposed another side of vulnerability. Recently, she found herself entangled in a painful business betrayal, one that left her feeling unprotected and exploited. To hear her speak of elder abuse, to know she felt abandoned in a world where she should have been secure, was a reminder that fame does not shield anyone from harm. Even a woman admired across generations could still feel alone, still cry out for support, still wonder why those she trusted had let her down. This wound was not only financial, it was emotional. To believe you are safe, only to discover betrayal, is a sharp blow to the heart. For Priscilla, it was another test of endurance, another moment where the world might have expected her to crumble. But she did not. Instead, she steadied away herself once again, proving that even in betrayal she could rise. And still, her struggles stretched further. In recent years, the release of the film Priscilla opened yet another storm around her life. Emails from her late daughter criticizing the movie surfaced, pulling her into painful public scrutiny. The film portrayed her marriage to Elvis from her perspective, but the ending, she insisted, did not truly capture the reality of their bond after divorce. This, too, she carried with grace. She did not lash out with anger, but instead clarified gently but firmly what was true to her heart. It was her way of reminding the world that behind every story told, there is a woman who lived it, who feels its weight, and who deserves to guard her truth. In this, Priscilla showed remarkable courage. It is not easy to live in the public eye for nearly 60 years, with rumors and assumptions swirling endlessly. To stand still in the middle of it all, to speak softly yet clearly, and to remain faithful to one's truth, that is a strength not easily found. She has fought again and again to be seen as more than a shadow of Elvis, more than a character in someone else's story. She has fought to be known as Priscilla, her person, her voice, her soul. Her life has never been simply about fame and fortune. If anything, her story proves the opposite. Her battles have been deeply human, fighting for her reputation, for her financial safety, for her truth, for her family, and most of all, for her peace. And yet, through it all, she has carried herself with a kind of elegance that few could maintain under such weight. Priscilla's journey stretches back to her earliest years, marked by instability and change. From that foundation, she built a life in the spotlight, endured a very public divorce, and somehow found the courage to redefine herself entirely. She could have faded into the background after Elvis, but instead, she worked tirelessly to shape her identity. As an actress, a designer, and a businesswoman, she created a name for herself. She refused to be trapped in someone else's shadow. This act alone spoke volumes about her strength. Even more remarkable was her ability to maintain kindness and compassion for Elvis long after their marriage ended. To remain friends, to offer support despite everything they had endured together, showed not bitterness but love. It revealed a heart capable of forgiveness, of understanding, and of holding on to the good even after storms had passed. Now, as she prepares to share more of her life in her memoir, Softly as I Leave You, Priscilla offers the world something rare: honesty. She has chosen to open her heart once again, to show both the beauty and the pain of her journey. She will speak not only of Elvis's struggles, but also of hers, showing the world that she has lived not as a flawless figure, but as a woman who has known love, sorrow, betrayal, and hope.